The air in Redemption Gulch hung thick and heavy, a noxious blend of dust, sweat, and the acrid scent of fear. Jedediah Stone, his hands bound cruelly behind his back, felt it clinging to his skin like a second, unwelcome shroud. The rough burlap of the sack that had been shoved over his head moments before still prickled his scalp, a constant reminder of the indignity. He was here, on the edge of town, under a sky the color of bruised plums, to face a justice that felt as cold and impersonal as the desert wind. He wasn't a bad man, not by his own reckoning. He'd lived a life of quiet labor, tending cattle, riding ranges that stretched further than the eye could see, but the gold dust of greed had settled on the wrong shoulders, and his own had been made to bear the weight of another's crime. A stolen shipment, a dead guard, and a bounty poster bearing his likeness, hastily drawn and terribly inaccurate, had brought him to this grim precipice. Sheriff Brody, a man whose gut strained against his belt and whose eyes held the perpetual glint of suspicion, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Well, Stone," he grunted, his voice a low rumble, "looks like you ain't so fast on your feet after all." Jedediah remained silent. Words had always been a sparse commodity for him, especially now. What could he say? That he was innocent? The jury had spoken. The town, thirsty for a culprit, had found one in him. His gaze, unfettered by the sack, swept over the assembled townsfolk. A sea of impassive faces, some curious, some gleeful, few sympathetic. They were here to witness the spectacle, the public cleansing. Then a ripple of murmuring spread through the crowd. A new arrival. A figure so striking, so out of place, that it momentarily drew all eyes. She was tall, unusually tall. Her silhouette, framed against the fading sunlight, commanded attention. She moved with a grace that belied her size, her presence a calm storm in the tense atmosphere. Jedediah's heart gave an unexpected lurch, a sensation entirely foreign to the despair that had been his constant companion. The woman strode with purpose, her boots thudding softly on the packed earth. Her name, Jedediah would later learn, was Ilara Vance. She wasn't a resident of Redemption Gulch, not by a long shot. She was a traveler, a doctor of sorts, with a reputation for healing in places others wouldn't dare tread. But today, her path had crossed with Jedediah's in a way none could have predicted. She stopped a few yards from the makeshift gallows, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the scene, lingering on Jedediah for a moment before moving to Sheriff Brody. There was a quiet authority about her, a steely resolve that seemed to make the sheriff shift uncomfortably. "Sheriff," her voice, clear and resonant, cut through the hushed murmurs. "What is the meaning of this?" Brody puffed out his chest. "This man, Ilara Vance, is Jedediah Stone. He's been convicted of murder and robbery. He's about to pay for his crimes." Ilara took another step closer, her gaze never leaving Brody's face. "Convicted by whose account? And who is this woman the posters speak of?" A collective gasp went through the crowd. The posters. They mentioned a giant woman seen with Jedediah, a phantom witness, a rumor that had fueled the town's already fervent accusations. Ilara, with her imposing height, was undeniably that woman. She was seen with him, Brody stammered, his bravado faltering under her unwavering scrutiny. Aiding and abetting, aiding him in his escape. Ilara let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. "Aiding him? Sheriff, I have never seen this man before today, and the only thing I aid is the healing of the sick and the injured." She turned her gaze back to Jedediah, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "You say he is a murderer and a thief. I say he looks like a man wrongly accused." The pronouncement hung in the air, charged with defiance. Ilara Vance had just thrown a wrench into the meticulously planned proceedings. The townsfolk, so eager for their grim entertainment, shifted uneasily. Sheriff Brody's face turned a mottled red. "Now hold on, woman," he blustered, his hand reaching for his sidearm. "You can't just waltz in here and accuse the law." Ilara remained unperturbed. "I am not accusing the law, Sheriff. I am questioning its haste. And I am suggesting that perhaps, in your eagerness to see justice done, you have overlooked a crucial detail." She gestured towards Jedediah, her hand steady. "The posters speak of a giant woman. My height is considerable, yes, but I assure you I have no part in your town's troubles. However," she paused, her eyes narrowing, "I did see a lone rider moving swiftly away from the scene of the crime shortly before I came upon Mr. Stone here. A rider who was neither you nor your deputies." A fresh wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Doubt a tiny seed had been planted. Brody, however, was not one to easily relinquish his authority or his kill. "A likely story," he scoffed. "Trying to cover for your accomplice, are you?" "My only accomplice," Ilara stated calmly, her voice unwavering, "is the truth. And the truth, Sheriff, is that Mr. Stone was found alone, disoriented, and clearly in distress. If he were a criminal fleeing the scene, why would he be wandering aimlessly within sight of the very gallows he supposedly sought to avoid?" Jedediah, sensing a sliver of hope, finally spoke, his voice rough from disuse. I was knocked unconscious. Woke up here." The statement, simple and direct, resonated with a raw sincerity. The crowd, swayed by Ilara's conviction and Jedediah's quiet plea, began to stir with a different kind of energy, not one of bloodlust, but of dawning uncertainty. Sheriff Brody, sensing the tide turning, felt a cold dread creep into his gut. He had built his reputation on swift convictions, on parades of justice. A prolonged investigation, especially one that pointed to his own fallibility, was anathema. "This is nonsense," he roared, his voice cracking. "We have witnesses who saw Stone with the stolen goods." Ilara stepped forward, her imposing presence a shield. "Witnesses who saw him near the goods, perhaps. Or perhaps witnesses who were encouraged to see what they were told to see. Tell me, Sheriff, did any of your witnesses see him take the gold? Did they see him strike the guard?" The silence that followed was deafening. Brody's face contorted with fury. He saw his carefully constructed narrative crumbling around him. This woman, this stranger, was dismantling his authority piece by piece. "Enough!" he bellowed, drawing his pistol. "This woman is interfering with justice. Take her away." But the townsfolk, their fear now tinged with a healthy dose of suspicion, didn't move. They had seen Ilara's conviction, heard her logical arguments. They saw Brody's desperation. Ilara, however, didn't wait to be taken. With a speed that surprised even Jedediah, she reached into the saddlebag of her sturdy mare, pulling out a length of rope. She tossed one end to Jedediah, who, with a surprising burst of strength, caught it. "If you are truly innocent, Mr. Stone," she said, her eyes meeting his, a challenge and an offer intertwined, "then you will trust me. We will prove your innocence, but we must move now before this man decides to make you a martyr." Jedediah, his mind racing, saw the truth in her words. He saw the desperation in Brody's eyes, and in Ilara's steady gaze he saw something he hadn't seen in years, a flicker of genuine belief. He nodded, a silent agreement that sealed their fate. With a swift, practiced movement, Ilara used her rope to create a makeshift pulley, giving Jedediah a critical advantage as he scrambled to free himself from the noose. The crowd, caught between shock and a growing curiosity, parted as Jedediah, now with his hands free, lunged towards Ilara. Together, they moved with a desperate urgency, Ilara's powerful mare a beacon of hope. Sheriff Brody, momentarily stunned by the audacity of their move, finally roared orders. "Stop them! Don't let them get away!" A few brave or foolhardy souls attempted to intercept them, but Ilara, with a surprising display of force, used her height and strength to push them aside, creating a path for Jedediah to mount the mare behind her. The animal, sensing the urgency, bolted, kicking up a whirlwind of dust as they galloped away from Redemption Gulch. Behind them, shouts and the distant crack of a pistol shot echoed, but they were already disappearing into the vast, indifferent expanse of the desert. Jedediah, clinging to Ilara, felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. He was a fugitive, but he was free, and he was with her. Why? He managed to gasp, the wind whipping his words away. Why did you help me? Ilara glanced back, her face a mask of grim determination, the wind tugging at her hair. Because, she said, her voice firm, I believe in second chances, and because no one deserves to hang for a crime they didn't commit. Now we need to put as much distance between us and that town as possible, and then, she added, a hint of steel in her tone, we will find the real culprit. Jedediah, his body aching, his mind reeling, could only hold on tighter, trusting the strength of the woman who had, against all odds, pulled him back from the brink. The unforgiving sun beat down on them as they rode, the landscape a monotonous panorama of scrub brush and rugged terrain. Jedediah, still weak from his ordeal, leaned against Ilara, his exhaustion a heavy weight. He was a man of few words, and Ilara, for her part, seemed content to let the silence speak. But the shared danger, the life-or-death escape, had forged an unspoken connection between them. As the day wore on, Ilara found a sheltered alcove among some rock formations. She dismounted, her movements efficient, and began to tend to Jedediah. She had a small medical kit, and with practiced hands she cleaned and bandaged a nasty gash on his head that had gone unnoticed in the chaos. You took quite a blow, she murmured, her touch gentle despite her firm hands. Jedediah winced as she worked, but his gaze remained fixed on her face. He saw the strength etched in her features, the kindness in her eyes. He was used to the harshness of the frontier, to people who saw him as nothing more than a cowboy, a laborer. Ilara saw something more. I owe you my life, he said, his voice raspy. Ilara offered a small, weary smile. We'll settle that debt by finding the truth. Do you have any idea who might have framed you, Jedediah? He hesitated. The West was a tangled web of grudges and betrayals. There was a man, Silas Croft. We had words a few weeks back, over a stray herd. He's got a mean streak, and he's not above underhanded dealings. Ilara nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. Silas Croft. I'll keep that name in mind. For now, rest. We need to be sharp. As dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, they shared a meager meal of jerky and dried fruit. The vastness of the wilderness pressed in, a silent testament to their isolation. But within that isolation, a fragile trust began to bloom, a seed planted in the dust of a near-fatal encounter. Days turned into a week, and Jedediah and Ilara moved deeper into the wilderness, always on the move, always watchful. Ilara's knowledge of the land and her keen observational skills were invaluable. Jedediah, his strength slowly returning, found himself increasingly relying on her guidance. He noticed how she studied the tracks, the wind patterns, the subtle signs of passage that he, in his own experience, had overlooked. One afternoon, Ilara pointed to a faint disturbance in the soil, almost invisible to the untrained eye. Someone's been through here recently, she announced, her voice quiet, and they were in a hurry. She dismounted, examining the tracks with an intensity that Jedediah found captivating. Look here, she said, pointing to a peculiar boot print. The heel is worn down on the left side, and this impression, it's from a saddlebag that's been hastily mended, not the work of a seasoned rider. Jedediah, squinting, could barely discern the details Ilara pointed out. You can tell all that from a few scuff marks. Experience, she replied with a slight smile, and a healthy dose of curiosity. This rider was heading southeast, towards the old mining town of Blackwood Creek. Does that name mean anything to you? Jedediah's brow furrowed. Blackwood Creek. That's where Silas Croft has family. His cousin, a man named Jedediah, runs a small assay office there. A grim satisfaction settled over Ilara. It seems our Silas may have a more direct connection to the stolen gold than we initially thought. A desperate man, perhaps, looking to pass off ill-gotten gains through a relative. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, not through magic or premonition, but through careful observation and logical deduction. Jedediah felt a surge of renewed determination. They weren't just running anymore, they were hunting. Blackwood Creek, a town that felt less like a place and more like an afterthought, lay silent under a sky the color of old tin. The dusty wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the scent of pine and the bitter promise of dust storms. Jedediah and Ilara, their faces streaked with grime and exhaustion, entered the town with the wary gait of seasoned trackers. They knew Silas Croft wouldn't be far from his kin, and the faded sign for Jedediah Croft's assays was a beacon in the gloom. The office was a claustrophobic space, crammed with the tools of the trade, rusted scales, tarnished pans, and shelves overflowing with rock samples. The air was thick with the metallic scent of ore and the musty odor of unwashed clothes. Jedediah Croft, a man whose wiry frame seemed to have been whittled down by a lifetime of deceit, hunched over a counter, his thin fingers sifting through a pile of what looked like glittering dust. When he looked up and saw the formidable pair, his shifty eyes widened in a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, his voice a tight, strangled whisper. Ilara stepped forward, her presence alone filling the small room, casting a long shadow over the counter. "We're looking for Silas Croft," she stated, her voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "We believe he's in possession of a significant amount of stolen gold." Jedediah's hands trembled, sending a small cascade of dust scattering across the counter. "Silas, ain't seen him in weeks. He's been out of town, on a claim up north." His lie was a flimsy veil, woven from fear and desperation. Jedediah, his gaze sweeping over the counter, noticed something that made his blood run cold. There, lying amidst the glittering dust, was a finely crafted belt buckle. The silver was etched with a distinctive swirling pattern, and a large polished turquoise stone gleamed in its center. It was the very same buckle he had seen on Silas Croft's belt the day they'd argued, the one he'd bragged about having custom made. "That's a fine buckle," Jedediah said, his voice dangerously low, a sharp contrast to Ilara's calm. He took a step closer, his eyes locked on Jedediah's. "Looks exactly like the one Silas Croft wears, the one he was so proud of, the night he bragged about a big score he was planning. He said he had a buyer lined up, a fence, who wouldn't ask questions." Jedediah's face went white. The elaborate facade he had so poorly constructed was crumbling around him. He stammered, his words a jumble of half-finished denials. I don't know what you're talking about. It's just a belt buckle." Ilara's eyes, as sharp and unforgiving as a hawk's, narrowed. "You do. And we know you're holding the stolen gold, aren't you? Passed off to you by your cousin. The buckle is a mark of his carelessness, a breadcrumb leading right to your door." Just then, the door creaked open with a groan of protest, and Silas Croft himself appeared. A sneer twisted his lips, and in his hand a heavy Colt revolver looked as natural as an extension of his arm. "Well, well," he drawled, his eyes flicking between Jedediah and Ilara. "Looks like my little scheme went a bit awry. Didn't expect you two to come sniffing around, especially you, Stone. I figured you'd be too busy preparing to swing." The scent of danger now hung in the air, thick and metallic. The standoff was no longer about gold, it was about pride, desperation, and the raw instinct for survival. The air in the cramped assay office crackled with tension, a tangible force that pressed in on all of them. The cloying scent of gold dust and the palpable threat of violence were a suffocating mix. Silas Croft, his face a mask of bitter determination, leveled his pistol at Jedediah. "You ain't taking me in, Stone, not after all this. I'd rather die fighting than rot in a cell." Jedediah, cowering behind the counter, whimpered, "Silas, don't be a fool. They'll catch us. The sheriff. They'll be here." Ilara remained a picture of serene, unshakable calm. Her gaze, steady and unwavering, was fixed on Silas. "There's no need for this, Silas. The gold is here. Your cousin has confessed. It's over. You can still face the law with a measure of dignity." Silas scoffed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Easy for you to say, tall lady. You ain't the one facing the hangman. You don't know what it's like to be on the outside looking in, to have nothing." He took a step forward, his hand trembling slightly, the pistol's barrel wavering. "I ain't going back to no jail." Jedediah's own hands clenched into fists at his sides. He felt the primal urge to fight, to charge forward and end this once and for all. But he also saw the raw, consuming fear in Silas's eyes, the desperate corner he had painted himself into. He looked at Ilara, her quiet strength a constant, reassuring anchor in the storm. She wasn't just observing, she was calculating, her eyes scanning the room, her mind working with a speed and precision he had come to admire. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic crack echoed through the small office, followed by a yelp of pain. Silas staggered back, his pistol clattering to the floor with a deafening clang. He clutched his shoulder, a grimace of agony contorting his face. Ilara, with a swift, almost imperceptible movement, had used a small, heavy metal pestle, the kind used for grinding ore samples, from her medical kit. She had thrown it with pinpoint accuracy, the heavy object striking his arm with a force that had shattered bone. "I prefer to resolve conflicts without unnecessary bloodshed," Ilara stated coolly, her voice as calm as if she had just made an observation about the weather. As Silas slumped to the ground, defeated and sobbing from the pain, she added, "Violence is a last resort. A calculated strike, however, can be a tool for justice." Mere moments later, Sheriff Brody and his deputies, having been alerted by a discreet rider Ilara had sent ahead from the last town, burst into the office. Their faces at first registered confusion, then a grim, almost reluctant satisfaction as they took in the scene. Silas Croft disarmed and wounded, Jedediah in tears, and Jedediah Stone, no longer a fugitive, standing tall and unblemished beside the towering woman who had orchestrated his salvation. The sheriff's eyes met Jedediah's, and in that brief, silent exchange, a grudging respect passed between them. The return to Redemption Gulch was a far cry from their frantic, desperate flight. The road that had once been a path of fear now felt like a victory march. Jedediah, cleared of all charges, rode with a newfound confidence, his shoulders back, his gaze steady. The townsfolk, their faces a mixture of shame and relief, offered hesitant, mumbled apologies as he rode through the main street. Sheriff Brody, humbled and perhaps a little wiser from the ordeal, offered a curt but sincere nod of acknowledgement, a silent admission of his error. But Jedediah's focus wasn't on the town, or even on his vindication. It was on Ilara. She had not only saved him from the gallows, but from the crushing weight of despair that had nearly consumed him. She had seen his innocence when no one else would, and in her unwavering belief, she had shown him a strength he hadn't known he possessed. He had watched her navigate the treacherous landscape of the West, a world built for men, with a quiet competence that was both awe-inspiring and deeply attractive. As they prepared to part ways at the edge of town, the silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken emotions. The air, once thick with danger, was now soft with the promise of a peaceful dusk. I don't know how to thank you, Ilara," he finally managed, his voice rough with sincerity, a stark contrast to the casual drawl he was used to. You saved my life, and not just from the law. You gave me back my life." Ilara smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. "You don't have to, Jedediah. Seeing justice done is reward enough. Besides," she added, her gaze lingering on his, "I suspect our paths may cross again. The West is a big place, but it has a way of bringing people together when they least expect it." Jedediah felt a pang of regret, a deep and unexpected sorrow at the thought of her leaving. He had come to rely on her quiet strength, her keen intellect, and yes, even her imposing presence, the feeling that had bloomed between them in the harsh soil of their shared ordeal, was no longer a nascent thing. It was a full-grown, undeniable emotion. He was drawn to her in a way he hadn't anticipated, a pull that felt both gentle and irresistible. He took a step closer, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. Perhaps I could accompany you for a while, if you'd have me. There are places I've wanted to see, skills I could offer, a hand to help set up a new camp, a lookout to keep watch. He wasn't just offering to be a companion, he was offering to be her partner. Ilara's smile widened, a hint of genuine delight sparkling in her eyes. "I think," she said, her voice soft but firm, "that would be a very good idea, Jedediah Stone. A very good idea indeed." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a blaze of orange and purple, Jedediah and Ilara stood together, a cowboy and a giantess, two souls who had found an unexpected connection in the crucible of the Wild West. Their journey together was far from over. It was only just beginning, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest desires are born not of solitude, but of the shared experience of overcoming the impossible. The trail ahead was unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, the uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an invitation.